Hello there. A very good evening to all of you. How are you guys? Okay. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Arshpreet and I'm a masterclass teacher at Vedantu, right? So today I am going to pick a very interesting topic that we use in everyday life. Like everyday life, we make a lot of mistakes as far as this topic is concerned. It is an integral topic as class 10th and 9th grammar is concerned, a hint for you. And it is, we basically use it with verbs, right? So it's like more of a helping verb. Right. So these are the set of hints I probably gave you to so that you can probably come up with the name of the topic, guess, think about it, guys. What are we going to study today? Something that we use in everyday life, make a lot of mistakes, not sure which word is to be used where, and why do we need to use that word there. So that's all about this the topic that we are going to study about. So any guess from your end as to which topic I'm talking about? Okay. So I have quite a number of suggestions from that came out from you guys. Okay. No doubt many of you are right as far as this topic is concerned. The topic is none other than, I forgot to welcome you guys. I'm really sorry. Anyway, welcome. Okay. So the topic for today's discussion is modals, right? So we're going to talk about modals. That's basically also known as helping verb. Right. So what basically are modals? What comes to your mind when I talk about modals? Like it's something a normal person or a common man would face a lot of problem, right? But people like you who are already into the domain of studying grammar, working a lot to score good marks as far as your curriculum is concerned, most of you might be aware as to what are modals, right? So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Okay, guys. So I have some set of words. I have, I have had, I have should, ought, cannot, must not, should, you must, shouldn't, better, ought not. So these are some of the words that basically I use to either ask for permission, either give any sort of suggestions. So these are the set of words that I use most common and make the most of we basically make a number of mistakes as far as this topic is concerned. So today, right here, right in this class, I'm going to break all the myths that most of you have about modals, right? And I'm going to make sure that nobody goes out of the class without clearing their doubts, right? So guys, let's get started. Before I jump into the video, I want to give you some advice, some tricks, some tips that would basically come to your help, right? And let's start with it. Like, what are those tricks? The very first trick is you can use some modals. For example, I have can. I have a nano verb for it, like it could be could. I have may. I might use might. I have should. I have ought to. We're going to study what these all stand for. I have must. I have to. Then I have will, shall, and would. So these are some common words that we're going to focus on, and I'm going to tell you which modal fits which sentence the best, right? So let's get into some of the basic do's and don'ts as far as modals are concerned. The very first thumb rule when it comes to modals is use it as it is. Don't change its form. So basically, I'll name it as it is. So use the word as it is when it comes to modals. I'll give you a very good example. Let's say I have to make a statement, and the statement is he can swim. Now, some of you might be thinking, That ma'am, we can probably make a statement in past tense, we can make one in future and the other one in present tense. We have three basic tenses, and what if we plan to make a sentence or phrase a sentence in any of these tenses? So to break that myth, I have a sentence that's when it comes to modals, please use it as it is. That means you do not have to write, he can. You can't use that, right? If you're planning to write the sentence in past tense, please don't use the word can. Just don't add ed right before after it, right? You can't use the word and change its form, he canning. Like in future tense, maybe canning is used or he will canning, right? So that makes no sense. That's a basic thumb rule, right? So even if you're not good in grammar, make sure you do not change its form, right? Do not apply tenses as far as modals is concerned. So I probably make a statement, he can swim, right? It would not make sense if I write the statement, he can't swim. So that is the first thumb rule when it comes to modals. Use it as it is. So that's the first thumb rule, right? I hope it makes sense, right? Okay, so let's have another thumb rule for modals. And the second thumb rule is use base verb, use base verb after modals. What I mean by this is don't use to. Now, most of us, we make a lot of mistakes, right? And I've seen a lot of papers like where we try to use to, right, here and there, everywhere. So let's put it in, learn it through this statement. I have a statement, let's say they might. I'll tell you the difference between might, could, should. We learn it. Don't worry, and you will never forget it once you do it, right? So I have a sentence. They might, which is a modal, with they might, or maybe I could use they might, they could, they should. I have this sentence. Join us, right? What if I have, so basically join us is a base verb, right? So when it comes to a sentence that I have to write a sentence or frame a sentence like that, I do not use to right after the modal. I can never say it the way they might to, which I told you not to use. They might too join us. Do you think it makes sense, guys, when I use to after the modal? Right? So basically, you have to use the base verb. This is the base verb, right? In its very basic form. Generally, it's in the first form, right? So you have this, you can't use to after modal, right? It's a general rule. You do not use to. You have to make sure you use the base verb, right? Otherwise, you're going to frame a very wrong statement. So that is the second thumb rule when it comes to modals. These are the basic two thumb rules that you have to follow before we jump on to the third thumb rule. Let's focus on the third thumb rule, right? So let's say if you have to make a negative statement, you don't like anything, you want to comment some negative aspects, right? So let's say I have to make a negative statement. Let's put it this way, right? So you have to use, right? You have to use not, right, after the modal. You have to use not after the modal. What I mean by this is, please don't. I'm writing don't, right? So what you have to do, don't use words like don't, right? Don't use doesn't, right? Don't use isn't. That's the basic. We make a lot of mistakes. Don't use the word wasn't. Don't use the word won't. So don't do that, right? So this is a big no-no, a big no-no, right? So let's frame it in a sentence, and then I'll justify my statement. The sentence is, let's say, I have to make a comment that's let's say I have to make a comment. You should not waste your time. Right? So I have used not in the sentence, right? After the modal, I have used the word not, right? I have not used any of these words that I have said a big no to. This is a big no, right? So I can't say you don't, you don't, shouldn't waste your time. That makes no sense, right, guys? So please don't use don't, right? Don't use doesn't, don't use isn't, don't use wasn't. A very simple way to frame a sentence as far as a negative sentence is concerned, just use the word not and your life will be sorted, right? So I have told you 3 basic thumb rules that would probably help you to avoid a number of mistakes as far as modals are concerned. The very first thumb rule is use the modal as it is, right? Do not try to fiddle with it and put in your knowledge of tenses as far as modals are concerned, right? The very basic. And the second thumb rule, I'll just put the first thumb rule right in front of you. And this is the first thumb rule that we talked about. It's use it as it is, right? Do not try to change its tense. Then I moved on to the second thumb rule, and that says use a base verb after a modal. I hope all of you know what a verb is. Verb is any kind of action, right? So that's a verb, right? So whenever you use a base verb, it makes a lot of sense, right? So you make meaning out of the sentence. But if you try to infuse your knowledge by adding the word to, right, you'll spoil the sentence, you'll spoil your paragraph, you spoil your writing and everything, and especially most of all, you won't be able to score marks, right? So that's the basic agenda when it comes to this class. Okay, third important statement and thumb rule is that whenever you're making a negative statement, please don't use don't, right? Don't use don't use doesn't, don't use isn't, don't use wasn't, don't use won't, right? If you have to make a negative statement with modals, use not after it, right? So doesn't, don't, isn't, they won't work well, right? So now I'm going to proceed in the class jump into the lecture as to what modals are, what we talked about. Let's get a brief idea before I jump as to which modal can you use when. I'm going to give you a brief overview as how it can probably make your life easy, right? Even in language practices or in a statement that we make in an everyday life on the daily basis, right? We tend to make a lot of mistakes, right? That probably makes other person might feel that you're using a wrong tone, which you don't intend to, right? So some of the models, they are used for formal conversation. Some of them, they're not used for a formal conversation. That means they're used in an informal conversation, right? So if you try to intermix those, like in a formal conversation, whatever modals you use, if you try to infuse informal, the person standing right in front of you, they might feel offended about it, right? So I'll make it very easy for you guys to learn the modals part, right? Let's see what modals are that we've been talking so long about, right? So what are modal verbs? So modals, they're called modal verbs, modal auxiliary verbs, modal auxiliaries. They are special verbs, like very special verbs, which behave irregularly. Of course, you just saw a lot of the rules that they behave irregularly in English, right? Most of them, they don't fix into some tense sentences, right? Some tenses, if I have to frame a sentence in, let's say, past or future tense, right? You have the same model which fits both of them or most of them, or maybe the 3 of them, right? So these are some of the conditions that we're going to follow or study in the coming lectures. The second important point is they are different from normal verbs like work, play, visit. These are the normal verbs that we all talk about. We are very familiar with them, right? They give some sort of additional information. Maybe I want to work, I can work, right? I might work, I should work, I could work, right? So these are some sort of additional information which I get in addition to use of a verb, a very simple word, right? They give additional information about the function of the main verb that follows, right? I just made a statement. For example, I say he can work. This is a very normal statement, sort of statement, right? So if I say he can work, right? You might have said he works. A normal statement with a plain verb is he works, right? Or he's working with the XYZ company, right? But if I want to give an additional information with respect to his ability, with respect to possibility or something else, right? Some sort of additional information comes into play, then I use this modal verbs which give additional information. For example, I just made a statement, he can work. He might work, right? He should work. He could work. So these all modals, these are all the modals that give some additional information, right? So they have great variety of communicative functions. Like they have a great variety, right? It basically tells all about your tone. What's your tone? If you're trying to behave authoritative, if you're trying to ask for permission, whatever is the cause, you have a different model for each state. So here are some of the characteristics I just told you. They never change their form. They never ever change their form. Just I discussed it with you. You can't add s, you can't add ed, you can't add ing at their end. Like either if it's past, present or future, most of the modals they remain the same, right? Second important point, they are always followed by an infinite without, that's to, right? So we discussed about how you can use to also, right? Then third point, they are used to indicate modality, allow speakers to express certainty, possibility, willingness, right? Obligation, necessity, ability. So these are some of the characteristics as to why do we need to study about modals, right? We need to study about modals in your 9th and 10th standards so that you become professional, right? You do not mix and match informal conversation with a formal conversation. In the coming years, you might have to type in or write a lot of formal emails, right? So it's very important that you have a set of modals that you can use in professional careers, right? So let's see what set of modals do we have in the class today. What are they? I talked about shall, we talked about may, we talked about might, should, will, can, would, must, could, ought to, have to. They always follows the this modal, right? Have to, have got to, right? So we use modal verbs to talk about an ability, maybe an ability, right? A duty, that's like it's your obligation, it's obligatory for you to do this, right? That's a separate tone, right? If you have the ability, that's a separate tone. A need, a necessity, and wanting. So there are different sets, as I told you, different the different sets of modals. Okay, so let's talk a bit about. I'll just tell you 5 of the basic modals as to where they are used, right? And then we'll follow some exercises, right? Let's say I have list of modal verbs and they can be can, it can be could, it can be may, might, will, would, shall, should, must, right? So these are some of the basic modal verbs, right? So the verbs or expressions like dare, ought to, had better, need not, behave like modal auxiliaries, right? To a large extent, and may be added, it may be added to the above list. So we have different types of modals, right? I am just going to share some of the tricks that will help you in the future class. Let's see what are they. Number 1, when do I use will? This is the first modal I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to give you this trick. Where do we use will? Right? So I use will when I am very sure about something. When I'm sure, when I am convinced, right? That this is going to happen, right? Second, let's talk about I am very sure, I am very convinced, right? I use the modal will. I'll justify the statement. Let's first look, just get a brief idea about it, right? Second modal, let's say I have can. Right? So most of us, we make a statement, I'll do this, right? But sometimes we also state, I can do this, right? So when do I use the modal can is when I have this, I can do this, right? I can, score 100 and 100 as far as modals are concerned. So you have this general ability. Then you have, when you have possibility, when you have an opportunity, or maybe when you want to make a request, right, or get permission. So these are all the cases where I use the modal that's can, right? The third important case, I'll just study case by case every modal with you. The third case of modal is may. Now, where I use may. Let's say the word very much states a lot. For example, I have something coming up in the future, right? So I have a future possibility. I use the word may. When I have a future possibility, or maybe I have to get permission, right? So I use the modal that's may. A very simple case. When I'm very sure, when I am convinced, I use the modal I will do it, right? So I will do it, right? When I have my ability, I have this ability to do this, I have the general ability, or there are some slight chances of this. There's possibility when I have to ask for request, when I have to make a permit, when I have to make a request, when I have to ask for permission, I use the modal that's can, right? And when do I use the modal may is when I have some, it may rain, right? It might rain, I say, right? So I'll give you some set of examples, and then you will be in a position to judge which modal fits the best, right? And the last or maybe fourth modal is, I can say, let's pick it up. Let's pick might. So again, might is also used when I have there's some possibility. But there's a difference between may and might. I'll make it sure that you get the difference between may and might, right? Then I have last two modals that we are going to study. The second last modal that we are going to study today is should. And then I have must. There's little difference between both of them, and that is should is when you make a normal advice, right? Or maybe use a strong suggestion. You use the model should, right? But when you use the model must, that means you are trying to make your point very strong. You must do this. So that means it is an advice, but it is a very strong advice. That's a basic difference. When I have to make a very strong advice, I use the modal that's must, right? So that's a basic difference when it comes to should and must. Now, most of you might be, really concerned as to why can't I use can, why can't I use could in all these sentences that come across, right? So guys, there's a very slight difference, right? I am just going to give you a very good overview so that whenever we go dig deep into the concepts, things become crystal clear to you, right? So it's very important for you to understand and look into the basic minute details as far as these modals are concerned. Now let's pick up the example of this pair that I have. Let's say I'm going to talk about today can, and I have could. Right? So where can I use the word can and where can I use could? Right? So let's focus first on can. Right? So if I say can is there's a possibility. The very first is where it is possible there's some possibility. Or maybe when someone has ability. I talked about ability. We just talked about some ability, right? Somebody has the ability to do something, right? So I use the modal that's can, right? I'll make a statement now. Let's say I have a statement, she can cook. A very simple statement. I use modal right before a simple verb, that's cook, right? So when I talk about this can and could, please keep in mind that these are verbs that follow either the present or the first form of verb. This is the first form of verb. By which I mean this is the first form of verb, right? So can, could, they basically follow the first form of verb, right? Just give me a second. I'll write can once again. So basically they follow the first form of verb, or we're talking about the present tense, right? So it's a very easy statement. She can cook. It's a base. It's possible for her to cook, right? Let's say the second statement is they can reach on time. So guys, do you think I should use reach, or do you think I should use they can reach on time? Out of all the discussion we did, what do you think makes more sense? They can reach on time, or they can reached on time? What do you think? I basically mentioned up right here. What do you have to use? We use it in the present tense, right? So what do you think makes more sense? Is it reached or is it reach? Okay, so most of you have understood. Yes, we use the first form of verb, that is reach, right? So they can reach on time. That means they have the ability to reach on time, right? So that is where we use the first form, right? Second important thing where I use can is, let's say I have second case where I use can is informal. I've written it in bold so you don't forget. It's can. It's with your cousins, it's with your family members, right? You can, if you have to ask for some permission, right? So you talk about, you use the modal can. For example, if you have to ask for permission or ask for any sort of help, for example, I say, can you switch on the light? Basically, at this time, you can very well make a statement like this, but make sure you use the modal can when you are at you're surrounded by the people who are related to you in an informal manner, right? Maybe your cousins, maybe your relatives. But when it comes to office and you have to ask for permission, if you have to ask for help, do not ever use the modal can. It sounds really rude, right? So whenever you're at your office, in your school, for your teacher, you don't use the modal can, right? You always use, for formal permission, you always use the modal, either you use it may, or I've written it right here, this one, could. So could is basically used when you have to get some sort of formal permission, and this is used when we talk about some sort of informal permission. That's a basic difference, right? So when I'm in my office premises, I generally say, could you please get me a cup of coffee, right? Could you please do this for me? That means it's more polite, right? But if I say, can you do this? Can you do that? Right? It's not that formal. It's not that professional. It's not that ethical, right? So informal can works. Formal, please use could, right? That's the basic difference that we tend to forget. Now let's study three cases where do we use could. we talked about can. Can is informal or there's some sort of ability involved, right? But we use the first form as far as can or could is concerned. Please keep in mind we use the first form of verb, right? So before I jump into could, right, let me make sure that we revise all the three basic thumb rules as far as modals are concerned. The very basic and the very fundamental thumb rule for modals is point number 1, don't change its form, right? If I say don't change its form, that means I can't turn can into canned, right? I can't say can, or I can't convert it with s. I can't use ed, I can't use ing. So that's a basic funda. Keep it as it is. Keep it very simple, keep it very easy, right? Don't change its form, right? Second important thumb rule that we covered is don't use or that was the third, right? So don't ever follow to, right? Whenever you're using a modal, let's say I've written a modal, and don't ever follow the word to after the modal, and then you don't have to write the verb, right? For example, we just made a statement, they might, they could, they should join us, right? That's a fundamental statement, right? A very easy statement, but don't infuse to, right? They might to join us, right? You're trying to connect, right? They ought to join us. It makes no sense. So avoid using to, right? So as far as your base verb is concerned, so just follow the base verb after the modal. Don't add any other word. That's the basic crux rule, right? And the third important thumb rule was don't use don't use wasn't, don't use won't. Okay, guys, so what else do we have to use? If I can't make use of all these statements, all these words for that matter, what do you think and should we use? Okay, so most of you are very attentive. I'm very happy to see. You have to follow the modal with the word not, N-O-T, not, right? So in place of all these words, I would write here, please write N-O-T, not. Don't use don't use wasn't, don't use won't, right? Then we talked about, let's say I revise will with you. I have the modal right here. It's okay. I have the modal will, right? So I use the modal will. I'm trying to make sure that you remember all these possibilities so that it becomes easy to, talk about it in the later stages, right? So I use will when I'm sure about it. I'm convinced about it. I'm very sure all of you will score really well in your boards, right? So I'm sure, I'm convinced that all of you are the toppers and you're going to score really well. You're going to nail it, right? But I use the word can, I use the modal can, then there is a general ability attached to it, right? Then you also told me, Are ma'am, we use this word can when we talk about when we have to take some sort of permission. Permission, right? And guys, what do you think? Which permission am I talking about when I talk about? Do you think, was I talking about formal permission, or was I using it as far as informal permission is concerned? Okay, very good, very good. All of you are telling me, ma'am, it's formal permission. Okay, what if I have to take a permission and it's informal? What can I use? Okay, so as far as informal permission is concerned, it's could, right? Wrong. Very good. So most of you were, I was trying to check how many of you are attentive. Good. Okay. So guys, as far as informal conversation is concerned, I use the modal can, right? But as far as formal conversation is concerned, we always use the modal that's could, right? We don't use can with we don't use can in sorry, like can is used in an informal conversation and could is used in a formal conversation. That's the basic idea. Okay. Should is there's some advice that you're giving. You should do this. You should exercise. You should go in for yoga. Everybody nowadays is crazy about yoga. I don't know how many of you are crazy about yoga. Like most of your parents might be telling you should do this, you should do that, right? We're going to study it. I have very good, interesting examples for all of you. Right? But when it comes to your scorecard, right? So most of our parents tell us, okay, you should do yoga, you should go in for cycling, you should do exercise, you should do this. Like, it's a strong suggestion. But when it comes to your scorecard, when it comes to your marks, right? They always come up and say you must score well, right? Otherwise, there's going to be a danda. You must score, right? So that's a basic difference when I talk about should, when I talk about must. Okay, so we are left with something that's can, right? Can, you told me, I'm more of possibility, or when ability is concerned, you use the modal that's can. What about could? The basic question and the most important question for the day is, when do I use the modal could? Now, I'm going to give you 3 sets of example where you can use the modal could. Right? The very first is I have to make it's in present tense, right? And I have it's more of formal. Let's say a formal conversation is going on, and I have to ask for something. Let's say in present tense, I have a formal conversation that's going on, and I have to ask for or make a polite request. Right? So I have to make a polite request, more on formal note, right? So I use the word could. I use the modal could. For example, I have to say, could I have a cup of coffee? Right? Could I have your book? Right? So even sometimes could is used for the past tense or a past ability, right? But you can also use it in present tense. It fits the picture well, past and present. Right? Second, where I can use could is, let's say I have my past ability, ABR. I have to talk about my past ability, right? Let's say, as far as my past ability is concerned, I could say, I could read for hours together when I was, let's say, 10. So I could read for hours together. I could play for hours together, right? That was my ability right in the past, right? So I could do this, right? So that's my past ability. Like I make a statement, I could read for hours when I was, let's say, 10. I was 10, I could do this, right? Or maybe I can also make a statement, maybe in my younger days, right? I could play, I could dance for longer hours, right? That's the basic area where I can use could. And the third case where I can make use of could is very interesting and very easy. But trust me, most of the guys don't know about it. Is about some past possibility. It's about a past possibility that didn't actually happen. Right? So when I talk about this past possibility that didn't actually happen, now time has gone. So let's make a statement out of it. Any idea of this past possibility? There could have been a possibility, but that didn't actually happen. For example, every day you go to the school, right? And your teacher comes up with this sentence that's you could have you could have completed your homework yesterday, right? You could have made use of the day yesterday evening, right? You could have done this, right? You could have. So they generally make use of these modals. All your teachers, they make use of these modals. You could have done this. So there was a past possibility attached that has already gone. You've lost that past possibility, right? So please make sure that you remember where to use could. The very first case is when you have to make a very polite request. It's more in a formal tone, right? Could you do this? Could you please do this? Could you please help me with this? Right? There is there's this case where I use a modal that's could. Right? And then if I have a past ability, if I ever had some ability in the past, for example, I say I could read for hours together when I was 10 or maybe when I was 11. Again, there was a past possibility, right? And then I have another example where another case where I can use the modal could. It's a past possibility, right? But that didn't happen. We come across this this modal could when we happen to reach our school. The teacher comes up and she tells us, you could have done this, you could have done your homework, right? You could have spared some time, right? So that's the case where I use the modal that's good, right? So these are some of the basic ideas that you have to keep in mind before you jump into the vast ocean that speaks a lot about modals, right, guys? So I'm going to quickly show you some pictures, right? That's going to make interesting all this very interesting. So I use modal verbs if I have to talk about permission, if I have to talk about ability, some obligation, some sort of prohibition is there, lack of necessity, advice, possibility, probability. So I have to express all of that. So modals come into picture at that time, right? So I'm going to jump into the pictures quickly, and then we're going to jump into this exercise. I'm going to show you this exercise. So I have used a modal, and that says yes, we can do it, right? A very easy modal. That means I have used the modal can. We can do it, right? Okay. Then there's a possibility, right? Okay. About this one. Our neighbor, there's this conversation, I found it really funny. There's this conversation going on between a couple, and the lady tells our neighbor, Mr. Smith, just read it very carefully, you're going to get the trick, right? Our neighbor, Mr. Smith, kisses his wife every day. Like she's she's complaining, right? He kisses his wife every day before he goes to work. How come you never do? Right? So this guy has made a very good statement. He says, honey, right? He kisses his wife. Mr. Smith kisses his wife, right? So he's talking, honey, how could I? Right? How could I? So as in he missed the possibility, missed the opportunity, right? I don't even know her. So this is know her is basically his wife. So that's a humor statement. That's a very humorous statement about it. Okay. So what about this? Sorry, we can't email our pizzas or maybe your pizza as attachment, right? You've used the word can't, right? So that's another trick. Way of saying it. Next, I'm writing about all the things I ought to, right? So this is ought to. I ought to do. That's there's an obligation, right? I feel it's important. Ought to do before I die, right? It's my autobiography. And I have one more picture. Mr. Saur, I can't take this report card home. Can't you make a few changes? He's asking his teacher to make some changes. Like, it's just a humorous way of saying. So he says, okay, well, I suppose I could use a larger font. Since you've not performed well, so the only thing that I can do, or maybe I could do, is its use of a larger font. So guys, this is all for the lecture. To see more, get hold of all the tricks and tips as far as modals are concerned, please keep watching the videos. And until then, I hope to see you soon, right? Until then, please take care, and thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye. Take care.